Good morning. Our topic today is the fact that I'm sick today. Actually, I'm not really sick today. I'm at a conference, but I would guess that most of you, at some time in your life, okay, all of you, have been sick. And so we want to talk about today what causes disease. Okay, so we're going to talk about disease. Mr. Scheid probably, if he didn't, I have it written on the board over there on the left, what we're going to talk about today. So our notes for today are on disease. First of all, there are two basic types of disease. Two basic types of disease. They are communicable. This is the kind of disease that can be transmitted from one person to another. AIDS is communicable. A cold is communicable. A strep throat is communicable. Most of the diseases we think of as common are communicable. The second type of disease is inherited. Inherited diseases are the ones that are genetically passed on. Down syndrome, Huntington's disease, some cases diabetes, some kinds of heart diseases. There's some evidence that those are inherited. Okay? So there's communicable disease and inherited disease. We talked about inherited disease back when we were talking about genetics. Today, and most of our time now, is going to be spent talking about communicable disease. How is it? What are we actually catching when we catch a communicable disease? What is it? What is being transmitted? What is it that you are transmitting? Because if you think about it, back in the day is not that long ago, 200 years ago or so, maybe 300 years ago, nobody knew what caused disease. Why were people getting sick? There was no answer. People would there's an old nursery rhyme, or an old rhyme. You may have heard it. Ring around a rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. I'm going to tell you that song came about during the Black Plague. Now, I don't know how many of you know what the Black Plague is. The Black Plague was a disease that swept through Europe in the late 1200s, early 1300s. Actually, it started in China, and we don't really know why it started. Swept through Europe, killed, some historians think, about 1 in every 2 people in the world. So, if you look around the classroom right now, every other person in the next 2 years would die of this disease. If you remember a couple years ago, we had swine flu epidemic, and everybody was freaking out about the swine flu epidemic. Well, I would guess that a lot of you, even if you didn't know you had it, we had 10 or 15 kids out of my classroom in one day. And probably because they had caught the swine flu. Probably because, now think about that killing people. So the Black Plague sweeps through Europe. And as it's going, of course, it's very scary. People would literally die in the street. The Black Plague, you get these big red sores on your face, and one of the last things you do as you die is like basically vomit out your blood. It would attack the intestinal linings and linings of your lungs, and people would die from bleeding out. So what we call bleeding out. They would bleed out there. So kids would see people just dying in the street, so people made up this song, Ring Around a Rosie. Ring Around a Rosie stands for the little ring patch people would get on their skin when they had this disease. A pocket full of posies. What people would do to prevent disease from catching it is they would put flowers in their pocket, because they thought, they used the word, and you don't have to know it, I'm just telling you, they said there was some miasma in the air that everybody was getting, and they had an idea that it came through the air, and we're going to talk about that it came through the air. They didn't know how, so they would put flowers in their pocket because they thought the aroma of the flowers would ward off the disease. Then, so Ring Around a Rosie, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes. Well, it's actually used to be achoo, achoo. We all fall down. And achoo meant you would fall down, you would sneeze, achoo, and blood would come pouring out your nostrils, and boom, over you would go, and you'd be dead. So they made up this children's rhyme, nice little song, you know, that maybe you've sung before, to help their kids with the idea of death and the Black Plague. It's a nice story for this morning, or this afternoon. So, the first kind of communicable disease, what are you catching? The first kind is bacterial disease. You're catching bacteria. Okay, somebody is giving you bacteria that you didn't have before. Bacterial disease is caused by varieties of bacteria, and the reason bacteria make you sick is they produce poisonous substances. Their poisonous substances they produce kill your cells. And I'm going to put on the screen here a list. Bacteria can be killed with antibiotics. And here are some examples of bacteria that cause a bacterial disease. Strep throat is one you've heard of. Gonorrhea is a sexually transmitted disease. There's bacterial pneumonia. Just giving you some time to write. Mr. Scheid can pause this presentation if you feel like you're getting too far behind, all right? So what we have on top here is a common bacterium called E. coli. I'm not sure if you know, but E. coli, there are many varieties. E. coli lives in your large intestine normally, but it can also be the cause of food poisoning. This one down here is called anthrax. Maybe you've heard of anthrax. Anthrax is a bacterium that can infect your lungs and produce a extraordinarily serious lung infection, which can kill you. Second kind of disease, viral. Viral disease is caused by extraordinarily small, that word is minute, not minute, not time. Minute means really, 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 really small. Living is in question marks, viruses. They can look pretty cool. Here's a little virus that looks like a spaceship. Viruses are so small. Viruses are so small that millions of them can fit on the head of a pin, on the point of a pin. One virologist, that's what a scientist who studies viruses is, said that a virus on the head of a pin is like a speck of dust on an elephant. That's how small they are. And viruses are really, really cool. Viruses infect your cells, and this isn't written on here, viruses can't be killed with antibiotics. The only way you can kill viruses is with white blood cells. A little bit later on here, we'll talk about how viruses can kill you. I'm not going to put that in here. So we have viral disease, and bacterial disease. Bacterial disease can use antibiotics. viral disease, you can't use antibiotics. Cold is an example of a viral disease. This one here is a really sweet virus called Ebola. Ebola virus has only shown up 3 times in our world's history as far as we can tell that we know of. And it's killed 95 to 99% of the people it's infected within a week. It's a nasty one. We don't know why, how it starts, and why or how it stops, because we've never found a cure. It's only occurred in Africa so far. AIDS is caused by a virus. We'll talk a little later about AIDS. Third kind of disease you can catch, and this is less of a problem here in the United States than it is in a lot of other countries, is parasitic disease. Parasitic diseases are caused by protists or animals. Okay, a bacteria was in the kingdom Monera. They're in the domain bacteria. Drew a blank there for a minute. Viral diseases are caused by things that may or may not be living. Parasitic diseases are caused by small organisms. Amoebas, roundworms, really, really tiny living things cause parasitic disease. Some examples, maybe some of you have had swimmer's itch. Swimmer's itch is a parasitic disease, and I'm going to come back to swimmer's itch here in a minute. Well, actually, swimmer's itch is pretty common in northern Michigan lakes. And I'd ask for a show of hands if I was standing here, and maybe I will. How many of you have had swimmer's itch? Okay? Swimmer's itch is when you go swimming in a lake, you come out and you have all these, a couple days later, you get all these little red raised bumps all over, sometimes your legs and arms, sometimes all over your body. And that's a parasitic disease, even though it really doesn't make you sick. If you've ever had it, it's really, really itchy. And so that one's common around here. One you may have heard of is one called African sleeping sickness, where people get a parasite in their brain. And literally, they called it sleeping sickness because it looked like the people would go to sleep and then never wake up. But what really happened is they fell into a coma. They started to go a little crazy, fell into a coma, and then died a couple weeks later. That's caused by a parasite. I have a drawing here that you're going to have to know, and I'm not sure how you're going to do this the easiest, but I want to describe it, and maybe you can abbreviate a little bit or something. This is talking about a disease, or a parasitic disease called Giardia lamblia. Giardia lamblia is why they tell you don't drink the water when you go to Mexico or other countries. I don't know how many of you have been to Mexico, okay, or anywhere in Central or South America where they tell you don't drink the water, okay? Why do they tell you don't drink the water there, and why can we drink water here? Well, their water has in it Giardia. Giardia lamblia. Giardia is a parasite. Okay? What happens is, let's start with how it gets in the water. Okay? Almost all parasites the definition of parasite is something that infects a host. We talked about this way back in the beginning of the year. We called it symbiosis. Okay? We call it a form of symbiosis, where this would be we called it the plus-minus form of symbiosis. Okay? The parasite is helped, the host is hurt. Humans are accidental hosts of this parasite. They really don't want to live in humans. They usually live in something like a beaver or other aquatic or mammals that live around water. So beaver has this parasite in its stomach, and what happens with it's a little bitty, teeny, tiny worm. And that worm forms what's called a cyst. You see the word cyst here on the bottom of the screen. It forms a cyst around itself. That's like an egg shell, kind of. Okay, now you're talking super small. You can't really see them. The bacteria will, I don't know if you know about this, about mammals, but they poop or they defecate outside. So the beaver defecates in the water. And in its feces are cysts containing these little bitty teeny tiny worms. Well, when you go to Mexico, they don't have water filtration plants like we do. Their water comes out of the tap. Where do you think our water comes from? Well, eventually it's coming from a river, a stream, or lake, but we filter it. Then we pump it into our, or you're saying, well, it's groundwater. Yeah, but we still filter it. Okay? So we filter our water, but there they don't filter it quite the same way we do. And so we drink the water. Okay, so we're up here. Cysts are ingested, that means taken in with water, goes into us, goes down into our stomach, and then it gets into our small intestine, and there at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, these little worms find a home. And so they come out of the cysts, and they start colonizing your small intestine. Colonize means to live at. And they live in your small intestine, and your body reacts to that. We talked about this before when we talked about your stomach and small intestine, about vomiting and diarrhea. That vomiting and diarrhea are where you try to eliminate, your body is trying to get rid of the stuff that's not supposed to be in there. So you do diarrhea, 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 diarrhea. And what's happening is your intestines are trying to flush out these little worms. And it takes sometimes 2 to 3 weeks for you to get rid of those guys. 2 to 3 weeks. So you can have, my sister had this, and she had diarrhea and vomiting for about 2 or 3 weeks because she, quote, drank the water. Now there's pills you can take too, and antibiotics do help. But basically the idea is what happens, well, you basically defecate, poop out these worms. What they do on their way out is they make a little cyst around themselves again. So now you flush the toilet, it goes into the water system, and they get taken up by another mammal, and they live in their intestine. Okay? Swimmer's itch actually works almost the same way, except it lives in ducts. And then the little worms the worms are swimming through the water and infect your skin. But they die under your skin. That's why they itch. So, Giardia. Don't drink the water in Mexico because you have a really good chance of getting that. Why don't people in Mexico get it? Well, we think it's because they're immune. We think it's because they're already immune to it. And there's some evidence of that. Okay, there's 2 more kinds of diseases that we've already talked about. The 4th kind is hereditary. There's nothing to say about it. And the 5th kind is cancer. We already talked about cancer back, when we talked about mitosis back in first semester. Okay? So, that is our notes on disease.